Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're making a cute little children's wall hanging. Now, the original idea for this came from my wife, who sent me a photo of actually a candy dish. And it was in the shape of a child's initial, and one of them was in the shape of the child's name. And she thought, what do you think about this for a show idea? I thought, you know what, I don't really want a candy dish, but we could kind of change it up and make it a wall hanging. And that's what we're going to do today. And it all starts off, well, with a printout that I did on the computer. Well, what I've done is I've gone on the computer, chosen a font, and got a capital E, which is the first letter of my granddaughter's name. And I have printed it quite large, but I've also added an offset all the way around, about 1/2 inch. The program that I used to put the offset on there, which is Lightburn, I use that in millimeters, so this is actually a 10 millimeter offset. And this is the main pattern for our wall decoration. So what I've done is I have taken a piece of poplar and I have milled it down to one piece that is 3/4 of an inch thick and one piece that is 1/4 of an inch thick. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to attach our pattern on here. I'm going to cover this with masking tape. We're going to use spray adhesive and attach our letter E onto our 3/4 inch poplar, and we're going to cut out the center of our letter E, not the perimeter. You'll want to leave that, but cut out this interior cut of the middle. And you end up with something that looks like this. Now guys, there is a little bit of burring on the back, even though I used a reverse tooth blade. That happens, it's no big deal. What we're going to do is we're going to give the back of this a good sanding. We're going to give the top surface of our 1/4 inch piece of poplar a good sanding. And then once we get that done, we're going to glue these together. But there's a couple things you want to be careful of. So we're going to spread a thin layer of glue here on our letter E. Guys, your pattern, that letter E pattern that is on the other side of this board, do not remove it. We still need it. So because we still need it, we need it as undamaged as possible. And what can happen to your pattern sometimes when you clamp things down is that pattern can shift or get damaged or wrinkled or distorted by the clamps. So a good idea here is to have a piece of scrap that you can put between your pattern and your clamps. In my case, it's just a piece of 1/4 inch thick hardboard or MDF, whatever you want to call it, and that is going to go a long way to protecting my pattern. So we're going to clamp this up, get some good clamping pressure on it to secure the backboard to our letter E, and at that point you can just set it aside and let it dry. Alright, so some time has passed and the glue here should be dry. The next step, guys, is to cut all the way around the perimeter of your letter. So we're going to take this over to the scroll saw and cut it out. But the advice I'm going to give you is, in my case, I made this out of poplar. Now, poplar is considered to be in the hardwood family, but it is on the softer end of that. So you really want to take it slow. It's an inch thick now. You want to take it slow, let the gullets of the scroll saw blade do their job and clear the sawdust. Otherwise, you're going to end up with all kinds of burning. So we're going to take this over and get our letter E cut out. And once you're done, you end up with something that looks like this. So we can peel the pattern off. And we're going to put this aside for now. There's more to do to this, but for now we can give this a good sanding and just set it aside. We'll come back to this in a bit. Well, at this point we're going to do a little experiment, and if this works, you guys won't have to experiment with this because I will have already done it for you. But what I'm doing is I am mixing up a small batch of 2-part epoxy resin. And what we're going to do is I want to sink some candies into this cup here. So I've got a few M&Ms here. We're just gonna put them in the cup. I want various colors because I want to test for two things. Number one, I want to test to see if they'll float. And number two, I want to see if the dye is going to run. That's the most important thing. Because I get the feeling if I were to sink these in water, the dye would run like crazy. But I'm hoping that I can pour resin over top of them and that they will stay sunk into the bottom of the resin, and that they will not bleed, that they're going to stay intact long enough for the resin to harden. So I'm just going to take this resin, I'm going to pour it over top of this, and you know what, I'll put it in my pressure pot, and I guess we'll leave it overnight, and at that point we're kind of at a standstill until tomorrow. Okay, it's the next day. We're just going to release the pressure on this pot and check how we made out with our test pour. All right, and looking at this, just trying to break away the cup here. I did use mold release on this cup, but it's not really meant for use with plastic objects. But it looks like the dye of the candy did not run and they did not float. They stayed in the bottom, which is exactly what I was hoping they would do. Okay, so now we can move on with the project now that our experiment is done. And for that, we need our letter again. So what I've done is I've spray painted our letter E black. Now, you don't have to. You can leave it natural wood if you want. But if you're going to leave it natural wood, I would suggest that you seal it with varnish or something like that before the next step. So what I'm going to do is I went to the bulk store and I bought a ton of M&Ms here. My granddaughter loves Smarties, but the Smarties were a kind of a dull color. So I thought the M&Ms were a better color for this project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up this letter E with M&Ms. Oh, look, I have extra. Whatever will I do with them? Yeah, I got to be careful eating those because they make my clothes shrink for some weird reason. It's odd the way that works out. Anyway, we're going to fill this up with the M&Ms, get a nice layer in there so they look nice. And then I'm going to pour epoxy resin in this entire letter and cover over these M&Ms. Well, my epoxy had thickened up a little bit and I was having some problems mixing it. So because of that, I got an extensive amount of air bubbles in this epoxy. I took it in the house and I sat it in a bowl of hot water and it thinned it out to a really nice consistency. However, I think the damage is done. The bubbles are all through this epoxy. So we're going to have to hit this with the blowtorch to get the bubbles out of it. So I'm going to pour all of this epoxy over top of these M&M candies. You want to make sure that they're submerged. This is still food and it needs to be completely sealed in the epoxy. If it doesn't cover it completely, guys, take some out because it has to be completely covered. Okay, I'm going to hold off there for just a second. I think I might have, whoops, I think I might have a leveling issue here with my actual frame. The epoxy is not leveling throughout. So I'm going to sit this on a board and get the board level up and make sure that the epoxy is leveling out evenly across our letter E. Okay, honestly, it wasn't that bad. It was just the way that the epoxy was settling. So either way, we've got it nice and leveled now. And we're just going to finish filling this, pouring slowly because we don't want to overfill it. And we just want to have a look here and see if there's any M&Ms that are going to be problematic. And I can see a few here, this orange one here, that blue one in the corner. Those ones are sticking out way further than what they should. They need to be either shifted or removed. Take your pick. So we're just I'm going to try to shift this one. But by shifting it, I'm causing problems down the road. Okay, that was able to fix that. And we'll do the same with that orange one there. This yellow one here is up above the surface, so we need to sink that one down or move it. Take your pick. We've got a couple in this corner that are giving us a little bit of an issue. All right, that's those one fixed. So go through and make sure that none of these are up above the surface. Okay, and at this point we need to get the air bubbles out of this. So we're just going to run over this lightly with a propane torch, and that will remove any of these surface bubbles. You may need to do it several times, hitting it more than once, but just remember, don't ignite your wood. Just light, quick passes, and that's all you really need. Continue to do that till all your bubbles are out of it, and then, you know what, let this thing dry. Well, it has been a week, and you don't hear me say this often on the show, but I'm not really a fan of this. I'm really not. We have, even though we did some tests, we have some problems here. And I'm not sure what happened here, but the finish or the top surface of our resin went a little weird here. The resin, which I didn't expect it to do, actually dissolves some of the spray paint, and it's hard to see. I don't know if we can see it here, but there's actually like a black cloud that runs in through this of where the black spray paint had dissolved and started to bleed in through the resin itself. As well, I don't know what I was thinking, but the blowtorch, running it over to take the bubbles out of the resin, I marred and damaged the actual spray paint itself. Now that we're going to wet sand that and fix it up and repaint it, but the whole thing is rather dark. Not only that, but some of the M&Ms actually split in the resin, and when they split, they emitted a little bit of air bubbles here, and there's like air bubble dots coming out of some of the M&Ms. So I guess the combination of the resin, the black paint, the black cloud from the black paint in the resin, it's not as vibrant as what I would like it to be. It's not as bright, and it just doesn't portray a little girl's bedroom to me. I mean, you can see there too that, look at the ripples in the resin. I'm just gonna move it back and forth here. You can see those ripples. I'm not a fan of that either. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some time. I'm going to sand this down to smooth out the top of our letter E. I think I'm going to paint it a different color. I don't think black really does it for me. I think maybe a lighter color, possibly white. That might help to bring out some of the colors here. And I think what I'm going to do is try to clean the top of this resin as best I can. I still have maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch of a ridge there. So I'm going to try to mix another coat of resin and just pour a skim coat over the top to finish it off and hopefully smooth it out. I don't know if that's going to work, but the way it is right now, I really don't like it. So let me get this skim coat done, let me get this repainted, and then when I get that done, I'll come back and see you and we can move on with finishing this project. But as always, guys, if you don't like something, you don't have to accept it. You can either change it, fix it, scrap it, redo it, whatever you want to do. But regardless of what our testing showed here in this pour of resin, it was completely different once we added the paint, the wood, the etc, etc, etc. So let's get this fixed up and then I'll come back and see you. Well, step one in our repair is complete, and I've been able to redo the surface of our resin. There was enough room from the top surface of the resin up to the top edge of our our monogram, that I was able to pour a skim coat and even everything out. Now we still have those cloudy black areas in there, and we still have those areas where some of the M&Ms from the heat, I'm assuming, cracked and emitted a little bit of air bubbles there. But at least the surface is smooth and the surface is even. So that's repaired. Now it's on to the next step. We're gonna give this a coat. I really want to brighten it up, so I'm just going to paint the letter E all the way around white. Well, a harder time was never had until you tried to cover up black paint with white. Guys, I hate painting. You all know that. And I had to give the white 4 coats to get it to cover the black. However, I do have some areas here where my brush has come down around the black. But I have to paint the black anyway where I've sanded it and marred it up. So I do like the black outer edges, and I like the white detail. It brightens it up much more suitable for a child's room as opposed to that all black. So I'm going to get the edges all the way around here painted up. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to put a sawtooth hanger on the back of this so that it can be hung up. I'll probably end up sealing the back of this, as it is just bare wood right now, and I really don't want that. So I'll probably paint this as well while I'm doing the sides, just to seal it all in. But other than that, that's pretty much all she wrote on our monogram M&M. And there you have it. A monogram M&M wall hanging child something hanging on the wall. Guys, what a nightmare. Some projects work really well here on the show and others not so much. And you get some channels that will gloss over their mistakes or gloss over their errors, change them through editing and make it so that they never happened. And that, in my opinion, is the most dangerous thing on YouTube that you could ever do, because it gives a really, really poor example of what woodworking is all about. And it sets expectations and goals that are just not attainable for the beginner. And it's a very frustrating process. But when you present a project that, even though we had several failures, I still persevered to the end and got it finished, it gives a much more realistic representation and shows the newcomers to the craft that, you know what, these guys on YouTube that pretend to be perfect, there's not a single one of them that are. And I'll call them out right here and now. There's not a single one of them out there that show this perfect woodworking channel that actually is perfect, because we all make mistakes. We all screw things up out here in the shop. We all have this great idea of these projects in our head, and for some reason or another, they kind of go off the rails. This one here, there were several mistakes that kind of screwed me up. Number one was painting the interior where the M&Ms go black. That really messed things up right off the bat, because it really darkened the interior where the M&Ms are, and that was a little disappointing. I was able to brighten the whole thing up by painting the rim of the letter E in white to give it a much brighter appearance, but it still doesn't brighten up the interior where the M&Ms are. I think if those interior walls were a lighter color, it might be a little brighter in there. Also, the mess up with the resin. That top surface of the resin somehow got really messed up, and then mixing it in with the black paint, which was dissolving and coming into the resin, that added to the mess as well. the M&M's cracking and allowing some air bubbles to come through. In retrospect, maybe what I should have done is laid out a bunch of M&M's and sprayed them with lacquer and sealed them up before I put them in the resin. Maybe that is, in hindsight, the way I should have gone. But either way, I kept going through the end, even with 4 coats of white. Oh man, what a tedious process for me. I hate painting, I really do. But I got it finished. And I think the final product, although it's not what I had envisioned from the beginning, it is not the bright and vibrant, cute wall hanging that, I had pictured in my head. It's still very cool and it still looks really great. And my granddaughter still loves it, so who am I to complain? It was made for her, and as long as she loves it, well, you know what? I guess we got ourselves a successful project. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. Not everyone can be 100% success, and not everyone can be 100% winner. But even though this one messed up along the way, it was still a load of fun, guys. It's always fun to try something new. It's always interesting to kind of go outside your comfort zone and try something that you normally wouldn't try. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But win or lose, you're going to see all of the results here on the show to give you a more realistic representation of the craft. Guys, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We've got a fantastic audience base, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in this week. I hope you've enjoyed the project. I hope you're going to try something like this for yourself and step outside of your comfort zone and try something new. And more importantly, guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.